went up, and then their costs came back down, right? So the meal at the canteen cost, I don't know, 35, or cost 36,000 at the beginning of the week, right? Went up to 38,000 and has come down to 34,000, right? Their costs have changed over the week, and so they changed the price at the canteen with their costs, right? No. It's been the same price, and they're going to keep that same price for how long? A week? A month? A year? Maybe 10 years? No. But wait a second, you already have a feel that the price for the meal at the canteen is probably going to stay constant for about a year. Yeah? And this is, even though we know that costs that they face are changing all the time. Well, this is not at all what we were talking about or thinking before, right? If demand goes up and down, the price should change. If our costs change, of course, our price should change, right? We're going to think of, we have our marginal costs, and we have prices going up and down, we're going to charge more. But this doesn't seem to happen. Maybe not to the extent that we would first think it would when we think of the analogy of a marketplace. There's some sense in which prices are sticky. Prices don't change all the time. And when they do change, they do so in a staggered fashion. And what staggered means is that it's not all at the same time. When the canteen decides to change its prices, there's a little supermarket, or like, not a supermarket, but there's a little place where you can buy like chips and candy and stuff underneath one of the dormitories, right? When the canteen changes its price, that place might change its prices a couple months later, right? Or maybe at the same time, or maybe a couple weeks before. There's no reason to think that it's going to happen all at the same time. It's not going to be synchronous. And so now think about the consequences of that. So let's say, right, and there's the restaurants just outside the gate here, which I went to one yesterday, right? The prices there, they might change their prices. They're not going to change it, charge more during lunch and than an hour later. As their costs go up, they're not going to change their price. They have probably a price that they've set that's a round price, and they're going to keep that price for a while. They'll probably change it eventually, right? And we're going to think about why and when and how policy might affect this. But the important thing with staggered pricing is that when they decide to change their price, there's no reason to think it's going to happen at the exact same time as the price in the canteen. And so now think about the consequence of that. So lunch outside the gate cost me 45,000 dong. Lunch at the canteen cost me 35,000 dong. Right? So you're paying a little bit more to not eat in the canteen. Right? So get off of the campus, right? Try some different food, and then it's okay, right. So I'm willing to pay a little bit more for that experience. Now, what happens if the canteen raises its price to 45,000 dong, and the restaurant hasn't changed its price yet? Oh, now the relative price has changed. Eating outside the gate is now cheaper, right, relative to the canteen than it was before. Well, if it costs the same to eat, right, at a restaurant outside the gate than the canteen, I'm going to go outside campus and take a break from the university and have the beef noodles that I had yesterday. I'm going to shift my demand. We're going to see a huge increase in demand, right, for the products outside the gate. We have non-neutrality of prices, and now imagine that the reason why the canteen changed its price was perhaps because we had expansionary monetary policy, large increases in the money supply, and it's starting to right, bring about inflationary pressures. We'll think about where that comes from in a minute. Right? But not every restaurant, every business is going to respond at the same time. So monetary policy is going to end up giving us some non-neutrality. And this is going to give real effects of monetary policy. Right? We're going to be in an ISLM sort of world. We're going to have prices adjusting to changes, also to changes in monetary policy, but sluggishly, slowly. It's not going to happen instantaneously. Right? They're not going to raise prices at lunch when there's higher demand. I didn't even say, maybe they're not going to raise prices in general when there's higher demand at first. And if this higher demand comes as a byproduct of monetary policy, this is going to give us a real effect. If monetary policy increases demand and prices don't increase, well, there's going to be more sales, and prices likely will adjust eventually, but if it doesn't happen right away, right, these effects will persist. We're going to have this because of the sluggish price adjustment. And we'll have, again, show we have a liquidity effect like in the ISLM model. So an expansionary monetary policy we can talk about, or it's going to be associated with an increase in the money supply, decrease in the nominal interest rate. Right, so there's an increase in liquidity, goes along with a decrease in the price of holding liquidity, this opportunity cost. So this is our liquidity effect. All right, let's think about our households. Our households are going to have a utility function, just like in the consumption savings model. We're just not going to look at across 2 periods. We're going to look across an infinite number of periods. Right, so the reason being, well, I'm not going to be around, hopefully, just this year or next year, but I'm going to be around for quite a while. Right? So maybe 0 to capital T. You're younger than I am. So if we take the average of the two of us, right? When I finally, you'll still be around, and you're going to live longer. And one day, you'll be me, right? It'll happen to you too. And then you'll be interacting with the people that are younger than you then. So there's always going to be this overlapping structure. So if we think of us as a society, right? Even though I'm eventually going to die, as a society, there's good reason to think that this can continue without a foreseeable end. Right? Or another way of thinking this, when we're talking about optimizing behavior, we're going to engage in behaviors to maximize our own utility. So think again, capital T. If I know that when I die, the reason why this is important is why would I want to save into the future when I die? Economics or micro would tell us, well, on the last day of my life, what should I do? If you know today's your last day, well, I'm not going to save. I'm going to go out and I'm going to party, right? I'm going to do all the fun. It's sad. Today's my last day, but I'm going to make the most of it, right? Well, not so fast. One, usually we don't know exactly when the last day is going to come, do we? Most of the time, it kind of comes as a surprise. So there's always, today might be my last day. Who knows what's going to happen? Knock on wood is what we say in English, right? Nothing's going to happen. I'm going to be okay. But it's a probabilistic event, and this every day there's a probability that I might continue to live or a probability that I won't. Ends up being I'm going to keep looking into the future without a defined end date, and this probability of surviving is somehow can be captured in beta. Right? Remember our impatience. Well, why am I impatient? If I wait, I might end up waiting too long. Right? So if there's something that I want to do, it's better to do it now than later, simply for the fact that I might not be around later with some non-zero probability. Okay, that's one. And two, we have what we call a bequeathing or bequest motive. So fancy old English word. All it means is that a lot of people have children, right? And what does that mean? Well, even if I knew that today was going to be my last day, you know what I wouldn't do? I wouldn't spend all my money. I'd be very concerned about my children's well-being. And so I would make decisions. I make decisions even now, thinking about my kids' best interest. So it's as if I'm going to continue to live after my death. I'm planning for 100 years from now because I know that my children are likely to be around in 50 years from now. My children are likely to be around in 50 years. I will not be. And if my children do the same thing, right, they're thinking now, 70 years into the future, right, and their children. So if I make decisions in the best interest, right, of my children, if we all do this, if we think of future generations, then it's as if, right, we live forever. Right, so those are a couple of ways we can motivate why we do this infinite discounted sum. Right, we have this discount factor. We talked about those consumption savings. If this is less than 1, this is capturing our impatience. Maybe it's because our lives are stochastic and there's some non-zero probability that we will die, sure. Right? And there's also other reasons why we might be impatient, right? Psychological reasons. So beta is likely going to be less than 1. It's positive, and if it's equal to 1, this also tells us a lot. If it's equal to 1, then the timing of when we get this utility doesn't matter. So if something makes me happy, I like it. And if it makes me the same amount of happy in 100 years from now, that's just as valuable to me today as me being made or getting that same level of happiness today. All right, so we have a feeling that this beta should be, 1 is pretty extreme. It should be lower than 1. All right, so discounted sum of utility. We're going to take another step away from this consumption savings model and think about the consequence of uncertainty. This is expectation. So we're going to write this problem down in period 0. We'll see what happens every period. We're going to be able to re-optimize, but in every period, we're only going to know what has happened in the past and what's going on now. There's no point in my life where I have known the future with certainty. If that's different for you, talk to me, right? We'll get into business together and make a lot of money. If anyone here can genuinely see the future, right? You've got a wonderful life in finance ahead of you. And we're going to take that into account here. All right, and so what are we going to do as a household? We're going to try to maximize this utility. And we have some choices that we can make. We want to maximize our utility with respect to consumption. Right? Again, think of consumerism, or we can think of it, more broadly with any use of our productive goods, right? Other than investment. This, right? So what we end up doing with production, right? It can be bigger, better, bling bling, but it can be, humanitarian things as well. We're also going to have utility from labor. Now this utility from labor is going to be different than the utility from consumption, and that, right, the more I consume, the happier I am, right? More pizza makes me happier, but each additional slice of pizza makes me less happy than the slice that came before. How do I increase my happiness in terms of working, right? I'm kind of happy now. You don't make me even more happy, right? Now I'm happier, right? Leisure, so not working, is what makes us happy. Ideally, we'd never have to work, right? Imagine, you get coffee, lie down in a hammock, read a book, listen to some music. It's what a life, right? Why do we work? Because it generates income, right? Obviously, yeah? We don't work because working itself is what gives us happiness. Working is an ends to a means, and it's actually costly. All right, so that's our objective. and we're going to choose how much to consume, how much to work, and we're going to choose B. B is our government bond, a nominal bond. It's going to be our savings instrument here. All right, so you can buy a government bond. Right? Now, and we'll get into the mechanics of that when we get down to 3. Now, what is consumption? We're going to have different firms producing different goods. So this consumption CT is going to be really like a consumption basket. And we're going to have many different goods, I, inside this basket. Uh-oh. It's an integral. Oh no. It's complicated, right? We're going to see this is actually chosen because it's going to make things simpler later on. The reason why, so an integral, it's the same thing as a sum. That's why I like, these symbols are kind of similar. It's just instead of summing over like a number of countable parts, we're going to sum over something continuous. Yeah? So we're summing like over a measure. In this case, we're going to sum over 0, 1, the space of 0, 1. So we're going to have all of our firms, all of the different goods that we have indexed by I, where I is between 0 and 1. So this water might be good 0.223. And this is good 0.257. And this is good 0.736. And this is good 0.85792334. Right? We're just going to assign a number to our goods, and we're going to have an infinite, right? A non-countably infinite number of these goods. All right. Why is this important? The effect of any individual good on our basket is not just small, it's infinitesimally small. So this is going to help us think about or have aggregate consequences from collective individual price changes, but no one price is going to affect our decisions. Right? The reason why this is important is when firms start thinking about price changes, right? So be a good example. Let's say Google or Apple. So Apple is a big company. It sells us lots of goods. It's going to be aware of how our demand for goods responds to the prices it sets. But it's so big that it could also think about not only the consequences of our prices on our demand because of a relative price change. If it increases its prices on iPhones, then it might make Android phones more attractive. It also knows if it increases its prices on our goods, this is going to lower our wealth, which is going to reduce our demand overall, also for its products, not through relative prices, but through a wealth effect. Remember, we've talked about like income and substitution effects. There's something going on there as well. And Apple can take that into account when it sets its prices, and probably does. We don't want to think about that behavior, right? No firm is going to be powerful enough that it can affect an aggregate. Right? So we're only going to be looking at the effect of demand shifts between products because of relative prices caused by those firms. All right, but so how do we think about this with an infinite measurable set of products? What I like to think of, the analogy for me that makes it easy for me to understand, is imagine clothes, but colors. How many colors are there? Are there 5? No, there's an entire spectrum of visible light. There's not 20 or 25 million different colors. There's a measurably infinite set of colors along the visible spectrum. Right, and so we're going to assemble a wardrobe with all the colors of the rainbow. Yeah? I've worn a blue shirt, I've worn a dark green shirt, and I think I've worn a black shirt. Right? Different color shirts, right? We like to have different colors. And we're going to have a preference here as another way you can think about this. When we put together our wardrobe, we would ideally like to have every color in our wardrobe. If one color, however, is a little bit more expensive than another color, right, or if blues in general are more expensive than the other colors, we will tend to demand less of the blue color. Right? We're not going to eliminate blue completely, though, because who would want a wardrobe without blue? That would be sad. We're just going to have less blue and more of the other colors. How much less? That's going to be governed by this epsilon. We're going to go through this then step by step. This is measuring the substitution elasticity. How easily can I substitute other colors for blue in my wardrobe? And if you notice here, this epsilon doesn't depend on I. We're going to be taking this substitution elasticity, right, not as good for good, but perhaps as an average across an economy. This is going to tell us a lot about the structure of the economy. In this parameter epsilon, we have a lot of things that are enclosed. So let me explain this then. Let's think about it. So if we think about epsilon as the elasticity, how easily I can substitute other colors for blue, this just seems like a preference thing, right? We can think about if we had different goods. Let's say epsilon is the substitution elasticity of something else for a medicine that I take, that I need to live. Oh, well, that substitution elasticity is going to be very, very low. I need my medicine or I'll die. Like, water and a laser pointer are good, but they can't substitute for my medicine. That's going to be a very inelastic elasticity of substitution. I've already revealed to you that my substitution of elasticity for water is very high. Right? I want it to be clean, otherwise I really don't care. So I can substitute La Vie for, Gerolsteiner, that I mentioned, perfectly substitutable, infinitely elastic. Epsilon would go to infinity. All right, so we're going to be thinking about an average across all these goods is what we're going to try to code into the economy. How does this tell us something about our economy? Well, if we're going to think of epsilon as maybe the average substitutability in our economy, let's imagine one economy where there's our supermarket has simply, let's do it, now we can do it here. Right? We have simply these three goods. So there's an elasticity for water and the towel. Well, this isn't zero. If I need to clean the board, I could use the towel, right? Or I could just throw water on the board, right? I don't know, a marker, right? So we can think there's going to be some average substitutability here. So let's call that first our epsilon 0. And now, let's look at another economy. That has this in the marketplace. Wait a second. These two things are very highly substitutable, right? I mean, I would say almost perfect. I mean, they're different brands. It's like Nestle water, Gerolsteiner water. Look, I've got a yellow towel. Look, I've got a white towel. They're both towels. Very highly substitutable. A little bit less, right? Gift, I shouldn't be drinking this. But if I want to clean the board, these things are pretty, so, I mean, this is probably better, but I think water would be good with the towel to clean the board, right? That would work, right? So there is, they're not as substitutable as these. These colors, also very substitutable, right? Depending, they're not perfectly substitutable. Maybe I really need to use red, right? Red for correcting exams or something. So they're not perfectly substitutable. But notice that we have a lot more goods that have higher elasticities of substitution, that are more easily substituted for each other. So on average, this economy is going to have a higher average epsilon than this economy. Wait a second. So this epsilon is going to be a measure of the average amount of competitiveness in our economy. Right? It's going to be a measure of the average competition in our economy. So if epsilon, this elasticity goes up, this means we have, on average, our goods are the average good is more substitutable with another good, so maybe we have more similar goods. There's more competition in this economy than in this economy, which has a lower epsilon on average. All right, so that's how we can now map this epsilon to a characteristic of the economy. All right, and when we maximize our utility, and if we just look at equation 1, if I know that utility is increasing in consumption but decreasing in labor, how would I maximize this? What would be the solution? Well, if there's no constraint, how much would you like to work? Yeah, nothing, right? I'm going to have free time, leisure the whole day. And consumption. If consumption didn't cost you anything, I get everything I want. Yeah? So I'm going to, ideally, infinite consumption and zero labor. But I can't. I unfortunately am faced with a budget. Yeah? So now we want to think about our expenditures and income. All right. What are our expenditures? What are our income? Right, before we start thinking about the letters, remember, that's also why this inequality is very useful. We can always spend less than our income. So this must be our expenditures, and this is our income. So now we're just going to sum up our purchases of every good I, and, well, every good I has its own price I. So this is going to be the total expenditures on individual goods for consumption. We're also going to buy nominal bonds BT that have a price QT. Our income is going to be, well, we're going to work and we're going to earn a wage. There will be bonds that we bought yesterday that pay out today. Right? So B is the payout of a bond. And then we might have, so think of this as then net of tax income. Or there might be elements in T that are negative. So this would be a positive addition to our income, perhaps from ownership of firms. Right? We might be, right, if they're going to be firms, and if they turn a profit, they're going to be given to us as income. All right, so this is the household problem. We're going to now get into how we connect CTI to CT and get from this PTI to a P. But first, let's take a 10-minute break, okay?